Coming up, Stereophonic and architect and set designer David Rockwell.
I think one of the things that was intriguing to us here is to create a place that was better in person than it would be on Instagram. Create a place that was better with your headphones off than headphones on.
Hello, I'm Patrick Pacheco. Welcome to Theater All of the Moving Parts and a double bill of artists who respectively show us how creative collaboration can spark wonder and surprise. First up, we explore with writer David Adjmi and director Daniel Aukin the fights, fits, and feuds among a group of rock musicians in a 70s recording studio in the smash hit Stereophonic. Then architect and designer David Rockwell takes us on a tour of the Civilian, the Midtown hotel which expresses in its glamorous rooms his deep love of theater and the collaborative spirit of his peers and colleagues. Welcome, Daniel. Welcome, David, to Theater All the Moving Parts. And congratulations on Rockin' Broadway with Stereophonic, with songs by Will Butler of Arcade Fire. It's an epic achievement.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.
We should say at the outset that the play is set in a West Coast recording studio and is about a fledgling British-American rock band collaborating on a new album. The group's made up of two contentious couples, Peter and Diana, and Reg and Holly, and the drummer Simon is making the most of his wife back in England. Then there are the two engineers, Grover and Charlie, who are a sort of Greek chorus to the personal and professional frictions that are going on in the recording studio. David, you've mentioned that you were inspired by the Robert Plant, Jimmy Page song, Babe, I'm Gonna Leave You.
Babe, baby, I'm gonna leave you.
What intrigued you about it?
There was something about the labile emotion in the song because it's so emotional, and the emotions in the vocals are so filled with contradictions. And there was something about this guy singing about he's going to leave someone, but really the emotions in the song are saying, no, I can never leave you, and don't leave me, and I'm going to leave you all at once. And there was something about that balled up contradiction of emotions that excited me. And then I was imagining in my mind's eye what it must have been like for this guy to record these very intense vocals, and I just imagined it in my mind's eye, and then I thought, wait a minute, this could be the set for a play, and I saw it all at once. So it was kind of like an instantaneous recognition.
What struck me watching the play, Daniel, is that here you are, a group of artists making a play about a group of artists making an album.
Mm-hmm.
What were some of the parallels that may have resonated for you in bringing those two worlds together?
One of the things that came up was, it's very often when you work on a show, there's some parallel of the dynamics of the play seep into the process of making the play. And David and I talked a lot, and we talked to the cast a lot about the fact that we really didn't want some of the pain and suffering incurred by some of the characters in the play to seep into how we made the play.
Huh?
And it was a very difficult play to make, a very difficult production to make, and it demanded a lot from everyone. And so there was suffering in the sense of hard work, but there wasn't suffering in the sense of people making other people feel bad. And we just really worked hard to make it a space where people could do their best work. And everybody was sort of in love with the play and could feel what it could be, and there was that feeling in the room, and so we were all pointed to the same North Star.
And there was also like a very extreme nervousness about just the gigantic feat that this play was going to require of everyone. I think that made them all super, super focused. Like for the first 3 weeks, no one really talked to me at all. I tried to like engage everyone in conversation, and they were like, "I'm busy, leave me alone."
Were they frightened of you? Were they scared of you?
I think they were just scared in general. They were all kind of terrified. I mean, Sarah Pigeon was just eating from a Tupperware. I just remember her eating from a Tupperware. And I'd say, "How you doing?" "Oh, good." And she'd just eat the Tupperware. So they were scared, they were nervous. But I think in a way, it was good because it really focused them. They knew how hard it was going to be, and they were really attending to the matter at hand.
I think that people will be surprised if they know your past work, David. 3C, Elective Affinities, Marie Antoinette, these very surreal, bold, way out of the box shows that in fact you fell in love with the theater when your mother took you to see A Chorus Line, 42nd Street, Dreamgirls. And you actually wanted to be a tap dancer, not a playwright.
I did. Well, at that time, when my mom was taking me to see those shows, the tap dancing was really in vogue. And so, I was seeing, Gregory Hines and Tommy Tune and My One and Only and all these shows. So I became infatuated with that kind of stuff. And just the virtuosity of tap as like just a mode of communication is so, I don't know, I'm still blown away by tap dance.
And is the virtuosity of tap dancing what remains of the virtuosity in the play itself? Is that what is one of the main driving forces of Stereophonic?
Maybe. I mean, I think I'm attracted to virtuosity in general, and I try to bring that to everything I do. And it is a very different kind of play than my other plays, and it's more realistic, but I do view realism as a style. So I'm still working with style, and it's still an experiment for me. I consider this like an experimental play.
I'm going to put you on the spot and ask you, what is the virtuosity of Daniel that helped bring this play to light?
He's going to hate me. I mean, he is a virtuosic collaborator in the sense that, but his virtuosity is in how he makes it invisible. Because I think a lot of directors with his kind of precise aesthetics and great taste and his ability to get things very rigorously right usually comes with a lot of ego, and you can feel the presence of the director on stage. And with this production, and really with everything I've ever seen him do, I can't feel the director in it. I just see the play sort of shining, and that to me is an extreme virtuosity in that.
It would seem that this world is far away from the world that you grew up in a Syrian Jewish community in Brooklyn. Is it as far away as we think it might be, or are there any similarities whatsoever?
I think there are similarities in the emotional dynamics, and I think one of the things I really anatomized before I started writing the play was, how do collaborations fail, and how do they go well, and how do partnerships fail, and why do they go well? And I think it's like at its bones, it feels, I guess the kids would say relatable. I would say universal. There is something universal in it. But I think, yes, the first time I heard people speaking the words aloud in a workshop, I felt really freaked out as I thought, oh, this feels so alien to me. But I'm kind of proud of that. Like, I don't want everything to reflect my own autobiographical details of my life. So I like that kind of writing.
There's a shorthand for it that people always refer to, and that it is sort of like the Fleetwood Mac story. To what extent is that a disservice to the play?
I think the play is wholly born from David's imagination, based on all sorts of existing biographical and musical experiences and documentaries and anecdotes.
Yeah, I don't know. I definitely worked with archetypes from rock and roll, and Fleetwood Mac was one of them, and there were others. But I always do that. So for me, that's not like a foreign way of working. But I think, if to answer your question, the way it does a disservice to the play is that it doesn't address the way the play was constructed. I built the play over a decade, and it took a lot of time to construct this world. And it was a world that I built imaginatively, and also the way sound is used, the theatricality and the theatrical apparatus of the play is very, very specific to this play. It doesn't exist in anyone's autobiographical story because it's a theatrical invention.
Daniel, what do you think the mainstream public misperceives about the rock world?
I am not an aficionado of the rock world whatsoever. That would be a good question for Will Butler. But I think one of the things the play gets into is just the hard work of it all, and how the sausage gets made and how difficult it is, and also how these are normal people who have normal concerns and don't know where the dry cleaners are, and are breaking up with their boyfriend and need to move out of the apartment. And so I think one of the things the play does is sort of just situate the art making, these transcendent songs by Will Butler in the very quotidian lives of these regular people dealing with regular stuff.
What do you think, David? I was reminded of Keith Richards' observation in his memoir that everybody thinks it's sex, drugs, and rock and roll, but in fact, you're at 3 o'clock in the morning and you're thinking of the beat you missed,
Right.
in the second phrase of the second song in the set.
And this is true about all really famous artists. There's the persona, and then there's the psyche. And I think they are both deployed by artists when they're building their careers and their art. But I think I was really interested in that schism and the space between those things. Like, we all understand, the stereotypes of rockers going and drinking and throwing televisions out of the hotel, window and everything. And I've read all that stuff too, and I know that stuff. But, when I started having meetings with really well-known actors, I was always very shocked by this, they were nothing like what I saw when I watched them on television. And they were just so shy, some of them, and introverted. And that made me think a lot about, rock stars. And when I was writing this play, just thinking about shyness and insecurity and nervousness, and how granular could I get about showing this thing that you think is so familiar in a way that defamiliarizes it.
The central couple are just on the cusp of what you described of this schism in a way, and that is Peter and Diana, who have this contentious relationship. Peter is this brash, narcissistic, driving force, alpha male force in the group, and Diana is this charismatic and beautiful, gorgeous singer. To what extent is their relationship and the tensions in their relationship of a 1970s sexual dynamic?
Well, it's of the time. I mean, and that's something I was working very, very hard to get real verisimilitude, and not put a comment on it, and not try to, situate it in something that would make people now feel comfortable. You shouldn't feel comfortable with it. And, but at the same time, I'm very defensive about Peter, because I feel like, when I wrote these characters, I fell in love with every single one of them, including Peter, and I am a little bit like Peter. Daniel will probably say I'm a lot like Peter, but I'm not. But I'm a little bit like him.
In what way, David?
Well, I'm very exacting, and I think Peter's big flaw is that he has a bad bedside manner. I just keep saying the same thing. If Peter knew how to grease the wheels a little bit better, and he was more tactful, and he was better at timing his comments and saying things in a constructive way, people wouldn't be mad at him, because he's right most of the time, if not all of the time. He's really good at his job. Don't think he's doing it from a place of ego. So I think he's got a lot of problems, and he's a man of the 70s, and he's got to work some stuff out, but yeah.
Daniel, in what way do you identify with Peter?
When I think about Peter, I think about the fact that he's a little bit like a film director. He needs to get the one take once. Once you have it on tape, you have it forever. And that's actually really different to what I do as a director, because I'm trying to work with the actor to get to a place where they can do it 8 times a week, and where it won't be exactly the same, even if they think it is 8 times a week. So I'm trying to build something robust that's repeatable and sustainable and true in some essential way to the intention and to the text. So I appreciate where he's coming from, but I also think about the big difference between how he's leading his band and how I'm trying to shape the dynamics of a rehearsal room.
I mean, those dynamics were ensemble work, unlike anything I've seen in recent memory. It's terrific. And you did an extraordinary job in finding Tom Pacinka.
Yes.
Am I pronouncing that correctly?
You are.
And Sarah Pidgeon,
Yes.
in these roles. And how did you work, Daniel, with Sarah in order so that Diana is not Peter's victim?
I think that's true to the writing. And she goes through a big change over the course of the show. We never talked about victimhood really. I felt like everybody who was, that recording studio is a difficult recording studio for many of them to be in at different times, but they all want to be in there anyway. And that felt, and I felt like they all had agency about that. I didn't feel like anybody needed to get out.
The play goes on and we hear snippets of music and we want to hear more.
Ooh, oh, just call me when. Ooh, oh, just call me when.
We should say that the songs obviously are bits and pieces in Stereophonic, but have now been compiled into an original cast album played by the cast and is now available on Spotify, and it's a terrific listen. It's really a tease in many ways because you just think, would you just settle down and let us hear the entire song, please?
Yeah.
And it's only, I think, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but around 45 minutes into it, Sarah Pidgeon sits down and sings Bright all the way through.
Sunday morning and the light's fine. In the beating of a bird's wing, I come alive. I was dreaming of a love song, but what good a dream when the wind starts blowing. Nothing forgotten, nothing forgiven when the night comes to an end.
That is David's brilliant dramaturgy and Will's brilliant songwriting. I think the way the music is deployed and having you want more and helping to create in the audience's imagination the idea of this truly awesome band are all part of the dramaturgy that David worked so hard to execute.
I mean, at one point we actually, there were a couple of songs where they were getting good at playing the songs during rehearsal and they were making them a little bit longer than I wanted, and they sounded great. And I was really enjoying the songs, but I said to the music director, now it feels like they're performing the songs for us because they know the songs are good. And I don't want that feeling. I want it to feel like we're observing them and we're flies on the wall. And so we cut some of the music down.
And Justin Gregg is the music director that you worked with so brilliantly.
Amazing.
And also, did everybody play a musical instrument before they were cast?
No.
No. Our music director was satisfied that people had enough musical ability that with support we could get them where they needed to go. And that was true.
Will Brill never played the bass.
No.
But then the rest of them had some musicality.
Well, he had musicality.
He had musicality.
But he hadn't touched a bass. He'd barely
Chris
touched a
Stack
bass.
played the drums.
Yes.
He was a drummer. And everyone else sort of had to figure it out.
You brought up Will Brill, who's brilliant as Reg. And there is that really startling scene when Peter actually takes the bass away from him and shows him how to play, which is a fairly violent act.
You know, that is something, the tension of that moment is something I kind of learned about talking to musicians and engineers, because I was trying to figure out, where would the drama come in when it isn't about relationship dynamics, when it's about the work. So what are the faux pas you could make? And someone brought that up. Taking someone's bass from them and saying, here, let me play it for you. That kind of possessiveness, it is very violent. So we did talk a lot about how to communicate that violence.
When it worked for Patrick.
It worked for Patrick.
What's fascinating about it, and surprising perhaps, but inevitable, is Reg's response. Reg's response is not, screw you, I'm out of here. It's something else.
Right.
How did you work with the actor in terms of that moment?
Well, if something's working, I don't talk about it.
So you just let it happen.
I mean, and sometimes it's not working at first, and then and these are very, very skilled actors, and so some of it is letting them find it, and then maybe at the end of the day, if I don't think something is working, maybe say, hey, maybe you think we should try some other things with that moment, even if I have an idea what the moment should be. I'm more interested with when you have actors that are skillful to say, well, what's your solution? And because you want to have a robust show that's repeatable 8 times a week, they need to get there. I can point to a door, but they have to walk through it 8 times a week. I'm not going to be in their ear. They have to have ownership, and it has to be their performance.
So many Broadway debuts in this show.
Yeah.
I think only Will Butler performed on Broadway before. Is that correct?
Yes.
Where did you find your actors? What's the eureka moment in the audition room?
Sometimes it's not in the audition room. Sometimes it's 3 days later.
It's later.
In what context?
Well, because you're seeing so many people. Being in auditions is so overstimulating, and it's such a bizarre process anyway. And some great actors do not do their best work in an audition, and vice versa sometimes. So sometimes it's like, well, who am I still thinking about 4 days later? I can't get that person out of my head. And at the time, I've been in situations where at the time of the audition, it didn't actually always make such a big impression. But if you're still thinking about them 4 days later, so a lot of it is personal intuition and and then, bouncing it off the whole team. And
But Sarah and Tom, we were both.
No, we were tremendously
Sarah,
excited about Sarah and Tom
Yeah.
as soon as they walked in.
When Tom finished his audition, I felt like I needed to go lie down for a while. It was so intense and so brilliant and moving. And Sarah, I remember when Sarah came in, Daniel turned to me and said, "Oh my God."
Yeah.
It's that moment.
I've never seen. Yeah, it was like he went crazy. It was you do know, and then it's sort of like, well, let's see if we can look at story elements and things like that, and figure out like how to contour what you're doing to this particular text. But we knew with all of them.
There's wonderful chemistry between Juliana and Will. Did they read together a lot? Did you
They
mix
didn't.
and match?
They didn't. I'm very good at pairing people in my minds to feel the chemistry out, and I did that a lot. Like I just thought about people together and thought, can I see them together? Can I feel the energy in my mind? And that is sort of like a lot of my process, because if you can't hear them read together, it's really, really hard to know. So it's sort of, this is so much like it's like Chekhov.
Yeah.
It's an ensemble piece, and they have to work together.
And they did do one
in an
reading
ensemble.
together.
Oh, they did. They actually did. I'm sorry.
So they
You're
did do a reading
I forgot
together.
about that. Yes, they did a reading together.
Getting back to the sexual politics of the play, did you find that there was a sisterhood between Holly and Diana in terms of dealing with this male world that they're occupying?
I just thought a lot about, okay, if there are 2 women in this band, who are they allowed to be in this band? Who are they allowed to be when men are around? And who can they be when the men aren't there? And what does that say about them? And one thing I read, I can't remember where I read it, but I think it was, I can't remember where I read it, but a woman in a rock band was talking about not being able to show emotion in front of the male rock band members because that would make her look unprofessional. And I thought, okay. And so what happened was the emotion gets shunted in this play. The men are so emotional and they're all having these emotional breakdowns. It wasn't conscious, but that is where it ended up going in the play. And then the women have to really hold it together for most of the play.
As a gay male playwright, do you find that you do a lot of research with your female friends about the characters that you're writing, or do you tap into your inner female?
The latter. I mean, I just feel like these characters just come to me and I follow them wherever they go in the beginning. And sometimes they take me crazy places that make no sense and I have to cut it later. But I think what I'm doing is sort of building the DNA of the characters by just listening and being very, very careful about how I listen to them.
You mentioned that you're like a composer when you write. So then how was it to work with Will Butler when you actually had music to, insert among your dialogue scenes?
Well, I had never done it before. I've never worked with a composer. I didn't know what to expect. And it was so much fun because Will is so much fun. He's not an egotist. And he loves to collaborate. And Daniel and I talked to him in the beginning when we started this process and said, look, this isn't going to be just, you bring in the song and then we do that song. Like, we need to go through a series of iterations and figure out how to make this really work for this text, whatever it's going to be. And he started to write the songs in the personae of these various characters as he saw them in the text.
What was the other complete song? There was Bright, obviously, and then
Masquerade.
also Masquerade. And how did you work with Will to write Masquerade?
That was the process. Yeah, he had the text, and then one day we just got. I remember where I heard it for the first time because I was in my doctor's office. He sent us some demos, and he just sent us Masquerade.
Got my ticket to the masquerade. Sold is sold and the money paid. I've been here so long that that's where you have gone. So I grab my bag and I'm on my way.
Grover is our Beatrice into this,
As in Dante?
as in Dante,
Interesting.
in the Divine Comedy. And it's a subtle build, because you notice him and they are sort of a Greek chorus.
Yeah.
And we kind of fall in love with both of them. I really fell in love with Andrew because we know that type. And it always seems to me that Charlie is probably the happiest in that group. We don't have to worry about Charlie. Eli, we do have to kind of worry about, and he has a long arc.
That's nice. Floor time? I think we're ready for the band.
What made Eli write for Grover?
Well, I'd worked with Eli before, so I had the benefit of that experience, and Eli auditioned, and Eli was fantastic. And, a lot of the questions we had for all the actors who auditioned for that part were just somebody who could hold down that kind of a journey, which is a very, very distinct one, and a lot of the dramaturgy of the play falls on it.
Because he starts out innocent and idealistic. And where does he end up, David?
I think that he ends up broken, but not. He's kind of.
I don't know. Does he begin idealistic?
I think that. I don't know if he's idealistic, but there's an innocence to this character. He's innocent in a certain way. He's come into this process and he's meeting one of his idols, which is Peter, and he really looks up to Peter, and I think there's something very sweet about this sort of him trying to impress Peter, like win Peter's favor, and Peter's just like, ugh, and I think over the course of the play, this dream of his, which is to be working with these great rock musicians and become this engineer and do this work, it starts to kind of curdle before his eyes, and he sees sort of the ugliness in the process and the difficulties of it. And I think, but by the end of the play, understanding of what just happened to him and how he can synthesize it into his own life experience. So I think he's growing up, but it happens like the very, very end of the play.
Daniel, is that how you see his arc?
I think it's all of that. It's very hard to talk about without talking about the last 3 minutes of the play. And for anybody who hasn't seen it, I don't want to spoil the last 3 minutes of the play. So, I think there is a lot of that there. And I agree with what David said.
Can you tell us what he's listening to at the end of the play? Is he listening to a snippet of music?
He's
a
listening
full
to the song, Holly's song Drive, which we hear at the end of the first act.
Whatever wakes you in the morning, whatever keeps you up at night.
So we've been seeing them laying down the vocals for that song, doing the harmonies for that song.
And it's Holly's song?
Yeah.
Oh, that's great. It's good that you gave Holly the last word, because,
She's been through it.
She's been through it in many respects.
Yeah.
And again, sort of like Charlie, we don't really worry about Holly all that much. She seems pretty well grounded.
Well, that's what she tries to show you. But she's pretty fragile, but she has a tough exterior. She can fool you easily.
Well, we fall in love with all these characters. We have to wrap up, but Eli, I think, at once quotes his mom, interesting enough, saying, my mother once said, suffer and learn. Is that sort of like the tent pole of this show for you?
Well, you know, it's Greek, pathemathos. That's a Greek saying, suffer and learn. So I gave his mother a Greek, something that my Greek tragedy professor taught me about when I was an undergraduate. But I think that, I think the play is so much, in one sense, yes, it's about a band making an album, but I think in another sense, it really is about how we endure really difficult trials in order to get something that we think is going to be rewarding for us, and what do we have to give up to get those things, and is it worth it?
And Daniel, is this Greek tragedy to you?
You know, I don't put, stereophonic is just stereophonic. I don't put any label on it.
It is unlabeled. It's unlike anything that we've experienced, and we have the two of you to thank for it, and a beautiful ensemble of actors and a terrific creative team. So congratulations on it.
Thanks so much, Patrick.
We are taking a short break. When theater All the Moving Parts resumes, I'll be joined by architect and set designer David Rockwell at the Civilian, the Midtown Hotel in which he collaborated with peers and colleagues to celebrate the rich legacy of the theater. We're back. I'm now in noisy Midtown Manhattan at the Civilian Hotel with architect and set designer David Rockwell to discuss how he created a dazzling theatrical world for its guests, giving a sense of permanence to the ephemeral art of theater. Congratulations, David, on the 40th anniversary of the Rockwell Group.
Thank you.
As its president and as its founder, you have designed airport terminals, restaurants, playgrounds, public spaces, and even theater sets. But
Especially theater sets.
Especially theater sets, because that's really at your emotional core, I think. Why?
My interest in theater grew directly out of a mom who was a choreographer. I was the oldest of 5, so by the time I showed up, it was community theater she was choreographing.
In Deal, New Jersey.
In Deal, New Jersey, yeah. Born in Chicago, then we moved to Deal. And I found theater in this very sleepy, very privileged suburb, all with giant private homes, that the community theater in the summer sort of activated Deal in a way that I found life-giving. And just more and more I found that telling stories together for me just felt like home. It felt like what I wanted to do. So it was the first thing that got me interested in the power of design.
And at the age of 12, you went to the theater, I think for the first time.
Yep.
With your mom and your dad. You saw Fiddler on the Roof with Herschel Bernardi, and also designed by the great Boris Aronson. How did that inform your personal ethos?
Well, I'll tell you, designers, I think, can look in the rearview mirror and things line up clearer than when you're doing them. So I had no sense of perspective at that time, but it was, I guess, the most definitive day. If you had to pick one day that changed my life, coming to New York, sitting with 1,300 strangers and seeing this show, Fiddler on the Roof, was mesmerizing to me, and every part of it was interesting. And then going to Schraff's for lunch and walking around Times Square, I think I just felt that these were experiences that brought people together, related to the community theater, and it was totally life-changing, and really drove a lot of what I pursued and researched.
How did this personal ethos of bringing people together work itself out in your designs for the Civilian Hotel?
I started my studio in '84 as a bold, brash young architect and risked everything on the first project. So Sushi Zen on 46th Street, I not only risked everything I had, I borrowed $6,000 from a friend to lend to the client because it was so important that I get it right. And that, every creative project being life and death, I think was something that was just part of who I was. And I always had in the back of my mind that theater and architecture were so closely related. So we had done quite a few hotels by the time I was approached by the owners here, and they had a parking lot on 48th Street. And their question was, we had done the original W, the first Aloft, the first Virgin Hotel, the first Equinox Hotel. So we created a lot of hotel concepts. And they said, so which of those would work here? And I said, look, it's a tiny piece of land. If you're going to put a hotel here, make it about the theater community. This should be a project that's about its community. And they said, okay, well, what would that be like? And that's how it began.
And was decades and decades later, when you approached this, was it still life and death?
It still was life and death, yes.
And what were the most life and death aspects of designing this particular place?
Well, there were several. One is, since theater was my first love, but really my second career, I wanted to make sure that this place honored the amazing community of theater artists who I'm really privileged to be a part of. And I thought, if this is really going to be for them, it needs to have a level of authenticity, that the building blocks of it come from participants in the theater community, many of them not in front of the curtain, all of the behind the scenes arts. And so that was life and death for me, to sort of thread that balance of making it a collection of amazing memories. And of course, theater exists in memories, it's ephemeral. So creating enough triggers for those memories, honoring the artists who participated, and making it a kind of viable hotel, of course, that was important too. So it was slightly terrifying, and I just gave a talk to students, and I kind of reminded them that your best idea is probably just on the other side of terrifying. So pushing through, that's good.
Be scared.
Be scared.
Be scared, whatever you do. You mentioned, of course, that the theater is ephemeral. Was the main attraction to doing a hotel in the theater district the fact that you could give a sense of permanence to something that is so ephemeral?
I think that's correct. I think it was a way to pull back the curtain, too, in a way that worked for the theater community and novices. So you've got very experienced people and people just looking for a place to go. And I also felt like Broadway's known for these classic haunts that are no longer here, the Polish Tea Room and the Stork Club and Barrymore's. So I thought there was a legacy possibility to create a place that would do that. And as you know from my work, I think a lot of what we want to do is create every possible design element that allows a spontaneous connection. So we know we wanted to put the guests front and center, which meant thinking about how the theater was going to surround them and immerse them.
You mentioned the fact that you brought all these designers together, people that basically are behind the curtain and working behind the curtain. And each of them, of course, are very singular. Each of them have their own ideas of what they want. How were you able to mold together a cohesive whole from all these individual voices and visions?
It's not an easy question to answer. I think it started by doing a lot of listening. So Clint Ramos and Christine Jones, Paul Tazwell, Jules Fisher, many others, David Zinn, Rachel Hawk. I started with a series of conversations about what this might be like, and got their sort of points of view. My first thing was to speak to Tony Walton, who...
The great late Tony Walton.
Amazing Tony Walton, the most generous man, who was so welcoming of me when I started work in the theater. And he was the first person I approached to see how we could include his signature in the hotel. And he had done these sketches for Playbill that look spontaneous, and they are, but he just had this kind of amazing hand. So he let us use 12 of those, and that gave me the opportunity to reach out to many designers saying, would you like to create a light fixture that sits alongside Tony Walton? And by the way, pick your favorite theater to draw.
Wow.
So that really, I think, brought people in.
Oh, really? That was a central organizing principle to some extent, at least in terms of the appeal and the attraction of these artists.
It was the first outreach to artists, and it was the first thing long before any of the other artifacts or models.
And they now live in the sconces in what is called the Roguesville Kitchen, and they are so beautiful.
I love them so much.
And are they both theaters that are still existing, theaters that perhaps existed at one point and were torn down? Or are they all of living theaters, the 41 living theaters in the theater district?
They're the 41 living theaters, although some of them are still named for the old theater because the ones Tony did were named what they were named.
Right.
But
the Lyric, for example,
yeah.
say.
And in many cases, they're done by set designers who had a great triumph at that theater. So there's something about theater that is inert without all of the many people who bring it to life. And that's how I thought of this place where, you know, what would be choreography on stage, here is movement through the hotel. And what's told in multiple scenes here evolves as you move through.
Talk a little bit about the choreography that links this room to, say, the Blue Room, that then links it to upstairs or the rooms themselves, or even what we mentioned earlier, the kitchen. Tell a little bit about that dance that you had to create.
Well, the first part to work out is kind of how you get in and how you exit. And it's a narrow lot. So as we started to think about that, the marquee, which is super Broadway, and sits underneath 3 brick arches. Most people don't realize this is a ground-up building. And these 3 arches under the marquee are my tribute to the Hirschfeld, or what was the Martin Beck Theater, which is my favorite exterior. But the fact that the entrance is narrow gives it a kind of backstage compression. So when you think about great spaces, you've been in like Radio City Music Hall on a much bigger scale, there's a sense of compression and expansion, right? There's a lower entrance. So in that entrance, we engage Little Fang, who are a husband and wife team that do Broadway openings and do people. And we said, can you treat the theaters like people? Can you do portraits of the outside of these Broadway theaters? So that's kind of the entrance with the marquee lights continuing in.
What's wonderful about that is that it seems to be a correlation to the overture that we hear in Broadway musicals.
That's so good.
That gets the emotional engagement, right? That's what you're looking for, emotional engagement from the minute you walk into this place.
Emotional engagement and wanting to go the next step. You want to hear the next 4 bars. And you don't get to hear the gypsy trumpets until you kind of move up the stair. But in this case, the overture is kind of extended into the circulation that brings you up. I've never thought of it that way, but it's a great analogy.
Which are the stairs. And of course, a staircase in show business is iconic.
Yeah.
Usually it's to provide the leading lady with a dramatic entrance. In this case, it's more like an anticipation because it's draped in curtain, which is another iconic element.
Yeah.
But it's draped in curtain so that you're not quite sure where you're going.
That's true, and it also has a slight feel of backstage because we wanted the kind of rawness and sense of exclusive getting a peek at backstage that stair provides, and you don't quite see the view until you turn around it. So it does have that component.
You mentioned, of course, the guest, and the guest being primary, and their experience being primary to this. We now can curate our own role in theater or film. We're listening to our own soundtrack. In which way were you aware that you were providing the guest with the best context for curating that life story and that experience, specifically theatrical experience?
Well, I've always thought of the guest as audience. So in all the restaurants I've done pre-theater, I always thought of the audience as the people who were there. And in terms of, you're mentioning that we're all creating our own show and movie all the time, I think one of the things that was intriguing to us here is to create a place that was better in person than it would be on Instagram. create a place that was better with your headphones off than headphones on. So, it's something about theater that it's very much about live experience. And I think Civilian is that way too. So you can look at images of the wall coverings where we had great costume designers create these one-off wall coverings in the elevators, but it's different to see them online than to step into the elevator. Mm-hmm. And it's different to hear about the models that are here in these vitrines than really taking a look at things that are mostly only visible to directors and cast members. These models are mostly done as private communications to communicate the designer's idea, but here they're put together, and you can create your own kind of theater piece by connecting what those might mean.
Once they come into the Rosevale cocktail area that we're in now, and they look at those set designs,
yeah.
I'm not quite sure how necessarily a layperson might think of them, but what do you hope they convey to the person that perhaps is not that initiated in the theater?
Well, I can tell you what I hope and what I've observed. Now, the observation may be filtered through that hopefulness, but I think it's relatively objective. I think, first of all, people look at it as a collection. Uh-huh. And then inevitably, they'll get a little bit closer and find something that they're particularly intrigued in and start to ask some questions. And I think that's the most kind of thrilling part, is for people to sort of lean in and recognize that these aren't just decoration. Each one is an entire story of creation in what these models do, which is what set designers do. They create the world of the shows, and they exist here next to each other, and they're constantly being updated. We just added Takeshi Kata's Tony-nominated Water for Elephants.
Fantastic.
And Mimi Leon's Sweeney Todd, which I'm a huge fan of. That set is coming in shortly, so it's constantly being updated.
What I love about the models that are on view now is that you've got what the Constitution means to me. One set, plain, very simple.
So powerful.
And Moulin Rouge, extravagant, big, epic. You don't discriminate, which is lovely because?
Well, in some ways, it's an ongoing process where we're reaching out to designers, and if we think it's interesting, and even if it's interesting because it's something that's closed but it's of interest, or it's something that never opened, we would consider that as well.
Obviously, when you come into this room, it was partly inspired by the American Theater Wing.
Yeah.
And the idea that the American Theater Wing brought support, comfort, and brought people together, soldiers, through World War I and World War II through the Stage Door Canteen. What is your association with the American Theater Wing and this hotel?
Well, we were trying to figure out early on with the owners, we thought there should be a non-for-profit partner that participated in the hotel. And it seemed like the American Theater Wing was the biggest tent we could tuck ourselves underneath, that had the widest footprint and the most interesting range of things, specifically starting with the Stage Door Canteen, which was both legendary and most people didn't know much about it. So we didn't have to slavishly recreate anything.
You mentioned authenticity, but there's also glamour that is intrinsic to the theater.
Yeah.
What is your personal definition of glamour?
Oh my God, it's a tough one. I think glamour is, in the case of spaces, which let's apply to spaces, I think is the setting for the jewel. I think glamour is creating the opportunity for someone to be glamorous. So I think design's job in that case is not to be foreground, it's to be background, but very luscious background, backlit, edge-lit textures, velvet. So I think space can engender a sense of being glamorous without demanding it, which I think goes into a whole different thing.
In your opinion, what's the most glamorous spot in the hotel?
I think the blue room, for many reasons. Take that blue, which is referred to as Joseph Urban Blue, legendary architect and set designer who worked at the Met and Ziegfeld Follies and did homes in Palm Beach at the same time, and the New School. But so that particular blue with a whole series of objects with banquettes and beautiful lighting, I think is glamorous in a way that that I particularly love and I'm particularly proud of. And I love the fact that it always changes. So it is also ephemeral.
Does authenticity ever collide with glamour, or how can they be in a complementary relationship with each other?
Well, I think authentic comes out of backstory. And authentic comes out of kind of respect and research and backstory. So I think it's a different spice than glamour. But I think they're both important. And as I said, my first terror here was creating something that was authentic. I then got around to realizing, well, it couldn't be so authentic that it wasn't glamorous. So, because authentic doesn't mean recreating something. Authentic means honoring and creating a sense of something. And I think glamour comes in how you treat surfaces, how you treat lighting. You know, I've been a student of lighting all my life. So I think they actually work beautifully together.
What is the most important?
So authentic
Yes, please.
glamorous is better than inauthentically glitzy.
Tell me that again. Authentically
Glamorous is much better than inauthentically glitzy. That's when it all goes wrong.
Well, that's kind of true because architecturally, glamour means sparkly, doesn't it?
It can, and actually I think people use theatrical sometimes to mean sparkly,
Right.
which I think is both a pejorative and inaccurate.
What's the most important thing about lighting to theater people?
I mean, it's such an interesting thing. Lighting is such a complicated art form in the theater and totally invisible if the lighting designer's done a good job. Here it was hard to directly honor lighting designers, although Jules Fisher, who's certainly one of the greatest lighting designers that ever lived, and his partner Peggy Eisenhower, Jules has lent us some of the most incredible pieces that we have on display here because he's been such a big theater collector.
To quote Stephen Sondheim, it's a city of strangers. Some come to work, some to play, if I'm quoting that right. How does what you've created here at the Civilian Hotel bring people together? Bring a city of strangers together?
I think it does it in a few ways. It creates spaces that are scaled for human beings in a series of rooms that you move through. So there aren't spaces that are bigger than, they're not more important than human. So I think people gathering are at the heart of what makes the hotel great. I also think there's a sense of shared mission that gives it a point of view that makes it authentic, and then we layered on glamour on top of that. I think it also takes a notion of hospitality and welcome and really brings that forward. And I think in a city of strangers, whether you're coming to play or work, kind of being welcomed and having a place, having multiple places to sit. You know, it's really many years of me thinking about what makes New York spaces great and finding a way to layer those into a theatrical context.
The Blue Room is so much fun because, of course, it's got props from many different Broadway shows. What is the power of objects once they've been removed from their original context, as they are in the Blue Room?
I think outside of their context, they're fascinating objects, and they are fascinating for seeing how simple one thing can trigger a whole memory. So I think, you know, Cabaret, the, I think, beautiful new production that's up, we have Boris Aronson's rendering of the original Cabaret. I mean, that's fascinating to see. That's not a prop, that's a piece. Or the pistols that were used for the first performance at the Public of Hamilton. You see the authentic object and then kind of trigger that whole memory. So they're fascinating. Each one is loaded with such history.
It's continuity, which is great, which is what the theater is all about. There are so many living things, obviously, here, and there's always the hubbub and buzz of people figuring out their lives at this bar or anywhere else. But there are also a lot of ghosts around as well from the creativity of what you've brought to life here.
Yeah.
And I know that when you were 16, your mother, Joanne, died.
Yeah.
And so I can't imagine that any event could be more seminal in terms of the ephemeralness of life and how quickly it can go. And I think that you're able to honor the late, great Tony Walton, Isabel Toledo, people that you've known and you've worked with and honored that. And I would assume that you can take a lot of personal comfort in that.
Part of my attraction to theater was being brought up in a way with losing my mom, losing my dad at a very young age, my brother Rick dying of AIDS in '94. I think I found theater way and design a way to really celebrate the moment. And I think one way to look at ephemeral is this kind of beautiful moment that doesn't last, but you really have to grab onto it. And so I think, you know, again, not knowing that was one of the motivations, but I think that's in some ways part of the power for me of physical storytelling. And yes, you're right, here we get to honor Robin Wagner and Isabel Toledo, who was one of my favorite people in the world, and we get to honor her in one of these elevators. Yeah, I think theater is, and it's hard to tell you how important it is for me to feel like I'm part of this community that continues with so many great artists in the past.
Well, you brought them into life, and here's to quote Sondheim again, being alive here and living it fully in these moments that you created in the Civilian Hotel. Thank you so much for joining us, David.
Thank you.
And thank you for joining us. We look forward to bringing you more fascinating conversations with artists and professionals who work and live only to astonish us. I'm Patrick Pacheco.